The morning air on the frontier world was cold and thin, carrying the dry scent of metal-rich soil and the faint hum of wind moving through solar towers. Elias Carter walked the narrow dirt path between his hydroponic fields with a thermos in one hand and a coil of thin cable in the other. The sun had barely climbed over the distant ridge, painting the land in pale gold. This planet had no cities, no traffic, no crowds, just scattered human homesteads spread across wide valleys and rocky plains. Elias liked it that way. Quiet made room for memories, even the ones that hurt. He stopped at the edge of his eastern field and sighed. Several of the nutrient lines had been chewed again. Something small and clever had been sneaking in at night. Not dangerous, just hungry. Still, if he let it continue, his crops would fail. "I don't blame you," he muttered to the empty air. "But I gotta eat too." He set another snare, the kind designed to tighten just enough to hold, not injure. He always checked them early, always released whatever he caught far from the farm. It was part of living out here. You didn't hate the wildlife. You just tried to outsmart it. By the time he reached the last trap, the sun was higher and the wind had picked up. The cable line disappeared into a cluster of low, blue-leafed brush near the edge of a dry stream bed. Elias frowned. The line was pulled tight. "Gotcha, huh?" he said softly, already preparing himself to deal with a struggling grazer or a six-legged burrower. He pushed through the brush, then he froze. It was not an animal. A figure lay half-hidden among the leaves, one leg caught in the snare. She was small, thinner than she should have been, with russet fur along her arms and a long, dust-matted tail curled tightly around her body. Large ears lay flat against her head. Her hands, not paws, were held close to her chest. Her eyes met his. They were wide gold and filled with something he had not seen directed at him in a very long time. Not anger, not defiance. Fear. Deep, certain fear. Elias slowly raised both hands away from his sides. Hey, it's okay!" She flinched so hard the cable jerked. A soft pain sound escaped her, and she immediately clamped her mouth shut as if she had made a mistake by making noise. Up close, he could see how bad it was. The snare had tightened around her ankle, not cutting, but firm. She must have struggled for hours before exhaustion forced her to stop. There were old scars along her arms, thin, pale lines that didn't look like accidents. "I didn't know," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "I didn't know anyone was out here." She didn't answer. She didn't seem to breathe. Slowly, very slowly, he crouched down a few steps away, far enough that he couldn't reach her even if he tried. He set the thermos on the ground and slid it toward her with 2 fingers. "Water," he said. "Drink." She stared at it like it might explode. Elias reached to his belt, unclipped the small cutting tool he used for cables, and then stopped when she recoiled, curling inward and raising one arm to shield her neck. That hit him like a punch. "I'm not gonna hurt you," he said quickly, his voice shaking. He placed the cutter on the ground in front of him and pushed it away from himself. Then he leaned back on his heels and waited. Wind rustled the brush. Somewhere far off, a survey drone hummed across the sky. Minutes passed. Her gaze flicked from his face to the cutter, then to the water container. Finally, with trembling hands, she reached for the thermos. She sniffed it first, nose twitching, then took the smallest possible sip. Nothing happened. She drank again, longer this time, but never took her eyes off him. "Good," Elias whispered. "That's good." He gestured toward her trapped leg. "I need to cut that." Slow. "Oh, okay." She didn't understand the words, but she understood the direction of his hand. Her body went rigid again. Elias did something that felt very strange out here in the wild. where you usually had to act fast. He waited. He picked up the cutter, but instead of moving toward her, he used it to slice a loose piece of cable beside him. He let the ends fall apart so she could see what it did. Then he set it down again. "Just the line," he said gently. "Then you're free." That word meant nothing to her, but his tone changed something. Her ears lifted a fraction. She didn't relax, but she stopped shrinking away. "Okay," he murmured, and this time when he picked up the cutter, he moved slow enough that each motion could be tracked. He reached the cable near her ankle, careful not to touch her. One quick squeeze, the line snapped. Tension released, and the snare fell loose around her leg.
She didn't run.
She didn't even try. She just stayed there, staring at the open loop as if it were a trick. Ilias gently pulled the cable away and set it behind him. Then he did the most important thing he could think of. He stood up and took 3 big steps back. "There," he said. "You can go." She didn't move. Up close, he could see she was in worse shape than he thought. Her leg shook when she tried to pull it under herself. She winced and stopped. "You're hurt," he said quietly. Her eyes snapped to his again, and for a second he saw something like resignation settle over her face. As if pain was expected. As if this was the part where things always got worse. "I've got a med kit," he said, pointing back toward his distant homestead. "Bandage."
Help!
She followed the direction of his hand, then looked back at him. Her ears were still flat, but now there was confusion mixed with the fear. He didn't step closer. Instead, he did something that made no sense in the wild, and every sense to a human being trying to prove a point. He turned his back on her. He walked a few steps away, then sat down on a rock facing the opposite direction. He poured himself some coffee with shaking hands and stared out at the empty valley. "If you want to leave," he said over his shoulder, "I won't stop you." He waited to hear scrambling footsteps, the crash of brush, the sound of someone running for their life. Nothing came, only the wind. After a long time, he heard a faint shift of movement, a soft, uneven step, then another. She was trying to stand. He didn't turn around. Another step, a sharp intake of breath as pain flared, then the sound of someone lowering themselves back to the ground. Elias closed his eyes. "Bouquet," he said softly. "Okay. We'll do this different." He took a slow sip of coffee, giving her time to hear the calm in his movements. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out a small emergency ration bar, and tossed it gently so it landed halfway between them. It hit the dirt with a dull thud. Food. That, at least, was a universal language. He heard her hesitate, then the quiet scrape as she pulled herself forward. The wrapper crinkled. She sniffed it, like she had with the water, a tiny bite. A pause, then faster bites. He stared at the horizon and let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. After she finished, he spoke again, keeping his voice low and steady. "Storm's coming this afternoon, bad one." "Lightning out here hits hard." He pointed again toward his home, though he knew she might not understand. "Shelter. Safe." Behind him there was silence. Then, very slowly, he heard the faint rustle of movement, not away from him, but sideways, as if she were trying to circle where she could still see him. Smart, he thought. Careful. Good. He finally turned his head just enough to catch her in the corner of his eye. She had dragged herself a few meters, keeping distance but not fleeing. Her gaze was locked on him, searching for the lie she expected to find. All she saw was a tired man sitting on a rock, pretending very hard not to be a threat. He gave her a small, crooked smile. "Name's Elias," he said, touching his chest. "Elias."
She didn't repeat it.
But her ears tilted forward, just a little more. Far above them, clouds were already gathering, dark and heavy. Neither of them knew it yet, but this quiet moment in the dirt and wind would be the start of a story told far beyond this lonely world, about a species that did not always conquer, did not always understand, but sometimes, when it mattered most, chose to be kind first. The clouds rolled in faster than Elias expected. By midday, the sky had turned a deep gray, and the air felt heavy, like the world was holding its breath. Wind bent the tall solar grasses near the edge of the field, making a soft rushing sound that filled the silence between the man and the alien woman. She still had not given him a name. She sat where the brush thinned, one leg stretched carefully in front of her. The snare mark around her ankle was swollen. She had eaten the ration bar and drunk more water, but she watched him with the same guarded eyes, as if kindness might still turn into a trap. Elias stood slowly from the rock. "Storm's coming soon," he said, keeping his voice calm. He pointed toward the darkening sky, then toward his house in the distance. "Need cover. Inside." She followed his gesture, then glanced at the sky. A low rumble of thunder rolled across the valley. Her ears twitched at the sound. He didn't walk toward her. Instead, he walked in a wide circle, giving her space, and headed down the path toward the homestead. After a few steps, he stopped and looked back. "You can stay out here," he said gently, even though he knew she didn't understand the words. "But it's gonna be rough." She stayed very still. Elias nodded once, like he respected a decision that had not yet been made, and continued walking. He had gone maybe 20 meters when he heard it. A soft, uneven thump behind him, then another. He slowed his pace without turning around. She was following.
Not close.
Far enough that if he spun suddenly, she could still try to run. But she was coming. He kept his steps steady and unhurried. The path wound between low rock formations and patches of stubborn green plants that had adapted to the mineral-rich soil. The wind picked up, tugging at his jacket. Another rumble of thunder echoed. Closer now. A faint flash of lightning flickered behind the clouds. When the homestead came into view, a squat metal and polymer structure with solar panels folded halfway down, Elias felt a strange nervousness. He had not had a guest here in years. Not since before the accident. Not since the house had been meant for two people. He climbed the short steps to the door and pressed his palm to the scanner. The door slid open with a soft hiss. He stepped inside, then immediately moved to the side, leaving the doorway clear and open. He stood where she could see him, hands loose at his sides. She stopped several meters away from the steps. From this close, the house must have looked like a cave made of metal. Solid, enclosed, a place you could be trapped. Rain began to fall, light at first, then heavier, tapping against the roof and ground. Elias walked back out into the rain and set the medkit on the top step. Then he retreated again into the doorway, making himself small, non-threatening. "Help!" he said softly, pointing at the kit, then at her ankle. Water darkened the fur on her shoulders. Her ears flattened as thunder cracked sharply overhead. She flinched at the sound and looked up at the sky, then back at the open doorway. Another flash of lightning lit the valley in harsh white. That decided it. She limped forward, each step careful and tense, like she expected the ground itself to grab her. When she reached the steps, she paused, staring at the medkit. Elias stayed inside, giving her the outside space. After a long moment, she picked up the kit. Only then did she step through the doorway. The door slid shut behind her with a quiet seal. She spun at the sound, back hitting the wall, beside the door. Her breathing sped up, shallow and fast. Her eyes darted around the room, at the table, the storage shelves, the small cooking unit, the narrow hallway leading deeper into the house. Elias immediately moved away from the control panel and held both hands up. "Door opens," he said, pointing to the panel. He stepped back even farther, until his shoulders touched the far wall. She watched his hands, not his face. Rain drummed loudly on the roof now, Wind howled around the corners of the house. Another boom of thunder shook the walls, and the lights flickered for a split second before stabilizing. Her gaze snapped to the ceiling, then back to him. Fear layered over confusion. "Storm?" he said, pointing up. Then he mimed rain falling with his fingers and made a crashing motion with his hands to imitate thunder. "Bad outside. Safe here." She looked from him to the door again. Slowly, carefully, he crouched down and sat on the floor, back against the wall. He lowered himself until he was actually below her eye level. "I stay here," he said. "You, there." He gestured toward the padded bench near the table. Far from him, she didn't move at first. Then another crack of thunder shook the house, and she flinched hard enough that her injured leg gave out. She grabbed the edge of the bench to steady herself and ended up half sitting on it. Pain crossed her face. She hissed softly through her teeth. Elias didn't rush to help. He just pointed gently at the medkit she still clutched. "Ankle," he said. Her gaze dropped to the kit. She turned it over in her hands, unsure how it opened. After a moment, Elias slowly reached to his side and pulled out his own smaller field bandage from his pocket. He held it up, then carefully unwrapped it and wrapped it around his own wrist to demonstrate. She watched every movement. Then she opened the kit. Inside were simple supplies: bandages, disinfectant spray, a small brace. She touched each item cautiously, sniffing some of them, ears twitching at the sharp smell of antiseptic. She looked at her ankle, then at him. He nodded once, slow and encouraging. She sprayed the injury. The sting made her flinch, but she didn't cry out. She wrapped the bandage clumsily at first, then tighter, more secure. Finally, she slid the light brace into place and tightened the straps. When she was done, she looked up at him again. For the first time, the fear in her eyes was mixed with something else: uncertainty. Elias gave her a small smile and tapped his chest again. "Elias." He pointed gently toward her. She hesitated. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. She looked down, as if the answer was written somewhere on the floor. Finally, very softly, she spoke. Her voice was rough, like she hadn't used it much. "Sarah!" Elias's smile widened, warm and real. "Sira!" he repeated carefully, making sure he said it right. Her ears twitched at the sound of her name spoken back without anger or ownership. Another long silence settled, filled by the storm. Rain lashed the walls. Wind howled. Lightning flashed through the small window, followed by rolling thunder. Elias slowly reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small square device, a basic translator patch used by traders on the frontier. He slid it across the floor toward her. "Well, talk," he said. She stared at it, wary. He tapped his own ear, then his throat, then pointed at the device. She didn't put it on, but she didn't push it away either. Minutes passed. The storm raged on. Inside, the house felt small but steady, a bubble of warmth and light in a violent world. Sira's gaze kept drifting to the hallway, to the deeper parts of the house. Elias noticed. "Just me," he said, holding up one finger. He pointed around the room, then back at himself. "Only." She studied his face, searching for the lie she had been trained to expect. Whatever she saw there made her shoulders loosen just a fraction. Her stomach growled softly. She froze, embarrassed. Elias pretended not to notice the sound. Instead, he stood slowly and walked, carefully, openly, to the food storage unit. He took out a sealed meal pack and held it up so she could see. Then he walked halfway back and set it on the table, backing away again. "Food," he said. She waited until he was seated on the floor again before reaching for it. She opened it cautiously, sniffed, then began to eat. This time, she didn't rush quite as much. As she ate, Her eyes kept drifting back to him, not with pure fear now, but with a deep, aching confusion. Every rule she had learned said this was wrong. That a captor who did not strike, did not shout, did not bind, was only waiting for the right moment. But the moment never came. The storm slowly began to pass. Thunder moved farther away. Rain softened to a steady patter. Inside the small house, a human man sat on the floor to make himself smaller, and a Vulpine woman with a bandaged ankle ate warm food under a solid roof. Neither of them understood the other's world. But for the first time in a very long time, Sira was somewhere she was not being hunted, owned, or hurt. And she did not know what to do with that. The storm left the world washed and shining, but the calm did not last long. By the next morning, low clouds still hung over the valley, thin and gray like smoke that refused to clear. Water dripped from the edges of the roof outside Elias's home, tapping softly against the metal steps. The air smelled clean, sharp, and cold. Inside, the house was quiet. Elias was already awake, sitting at the small table with a mug of hot drink warming his hands. He had not slept much. Every small sound in the night had made him listen, worried that Sira might panic, try to run, or hurt herself on the unfamiliar layout of the house. But she had stayed on the padded bench where she fell asleep, wrapped in the spare blanket he had left nearby. At some point, she had pulled it around her shoulders. That small act had felt like progress. Now she was awake, sitting upright, ears alert. Her golden eyes followed his every movement as he stood and walked slowly toward the cooking unit.
"Morning," he said gently, though he knew the word meant nothing to her.
He made a small show of stretching his arms and yawning, trying to show relaxed, normal behavior. Then he took out another meal pack and a fresh water container. He set both on the table and stepped back. Sira stood carefully, testing her injured leg. The brace held well. She still limped, but she could put weight on it now. She came to the table with slow steps, never turning her back fully on him. She ate while standing, ready to move at any second. Elias pretended to be busy checking a handheld weather pad. The storm had knocked out one of the satellite relays, and the signal was weak. Static flickered across the small screen. He frowned. There was a faint blip in high orbit that should not have been there. Probably debris, he told himself. Or a survey drone passing through. Still, a tight feeling settled in his chest. Across the room, Sira finished eating and lowered the empty pack. She watched him, then glanced toward the door. "You want to go?" he asked softly, pointing outside. She looked at the door, then back at him, her ears tilted uncertainly. He walked to the door control and opened it. Cool air flowed inside, carrying the smell of wet soil and plants. Sunlight pushed weakly through the clouds. He stepped aside, leaving the doorway open and clear.
"You're not trapped," he said.
Never were. She stood there for a long time, staring past him at the open world. Freedom was right there. No walls, no locks. But also no food, no shelter, no safety from whatever had hunted her before. Her hands tightened slightly at her sides. A distant sound broke the silence, a low hum, almost too deep to hear at first, a vibration more than a noise. Sira froze. Her ears shot straight up. Her eyes went wide, pupils narrowing to thin slits. Her breathing quickened instantly. Elias turned his head. "What is it?" The sound grew louder, a steady mechanical thrum from high above the clouds. Sira stumbled backward from the door, shaking her head hard. "No," she whispered in her own language. Elias stepped outside onto the porch and looked up. At first, he saw only gray sky. Then, a dark shape moved behind the clouds. A ship. Not a big one, but not a shuttle either. Long and narrow, built for speed. Its engines left faint ripples in the cloud layer as it adjusted position. Oh. Elias felt his stomach drop. Damn, he muttered. Behind him, Sira made a small, broken sound and tried to move past him, limping toward the side of the house as if she could hide in the open field.
Hey, he said quickly, turning back to her.
Hey, slow down, you'll hurt your leg. She shook her head violently and pointed at the sky. Hunters, she forced out in broken trade words. Take back.
Elias understood enough.
Someone was looking for her. He stepped off the porch and gently caught her shoulders before she could fall, trying to run. She flinched hard at his touch, but he let go immediately and held his hands up. Sorry, he said. Listen, you can't outrun a ship. Her chest heaved. Her gaze darted everywhere, searching for escape that did not exist. Inside, he said firmly, pointing back to the house. Hide. She hesitated only a second before following him. Once inside, Elias sealed the door and moved to a small wall panel near the table. He tapped a few controls, bringing up an external camera feed. The image flickered, then showed the sky above the valley. The ship broke through the cloud layer, descending slowly. Its hull was dark, scarred, and marked with symbols Elias did not recognize. A cargo hatch was visible along the underside. Not a research vessel. Not a trader. Sira saw it and made a soft whimpering sound before covering her mouth with both hands, like she was ashamed of the noise. Elias's jaw tightened. They're not taking you, he said quietly. A sharp tone sounded from the comm unit by the door. An incoming transmission request. Elias stared at it for a moment, then hit accept. Gray skin, narrow eyes, metal implants along the jaw. Human homestader, the alien said in accented trade language. Our scans show a registered asset on your property. Surrender it and we leave peacefully. Elias felt anger rise hot and sudden. He kept his voice steady. No idea what you're talking about. The alien's eyes narrowed. Vulpine female. Marked. Escaped contract labor. She is property under sector law.
Your ability is always under intent.
Behind him, Sira pressed herself against the far wall, shaking. Elias glanced back at her, then at the screen. You're wrong, he said. No one here belongs to anyone. The alien's lip curled.
Do not create conflict over a stray.
This world is not under strong human protection. We can land by force.
Elias leaned closer to the screen. You try, and you'll have more trouble than you planned for. The alien gave a cold smile.
One farmer? Elias reached to another panel and hit a wideband emergency ping. It sent a signal across the local colony network.
Within seconds, small acknowledgement lights blinked on his board. One from the hydro station 5 kilometers west, another from the mining rig in the hills, 2 more from family farms along the valley. He turned the screen slightly so the alien could see the growing list of active signals. One farmer, Elias said, and friends. Outside, the ship slowed its descent, hovering now a few hundred meters above the ground. A new sound filled the air. Engines. Ground vehicles. Sira looked toward the window as dust trails appeared in the distance. Human transports, heavy and old but reliable, rolled across the fields toward Elias's homestead. Men and women climbed out, some in work clothes, some still wearing tool belts. A few carried long-range rifles used for predators. Others had nothing but sidearms and determined faces. They spread out, forming a loose line between the house and the open field. Inside, Sira stared at the screen, then at Elias. They for you? She asked, confused. For you too, he said. Her ears trembled. On the comm screen, the alien captain's expression darkened. You would risk lives for livestock? Elias's voice turned to steel. She's not livestock. She's a person.
You come down here. You answer to all of us.
Long seconds passed. The ship's engines flared brighter, as if preparing to land anyway. Outside, more vehicles arrived. Someone activated an old planetary defense laser used for clearing orbital debris. Its targeting beam painted a faint red line across the sky near the ship, not locked on, but close enough to be a warning. The alien captain saw it. His eyes flicked to the side, likely reading his own sensors.
This is not finished, he said coldly. Humans make many enemies. Get in line, Elias replied.
The transmission cut. The ship hung in the air for a tense moment longer. Then, slowly, it rose back toward the clouds. Within a minute, it was only a dark shape again. Then it was gone. Silence fell over the valley except for the fading rumble of engines. Inside the house, Sira slid down the wall to sit on the floor. Her legs gave out, not from injury this time, but from the release of terror she had been holding. Elias let out a long breath he hadn't realized he was holding. A knock sounded at the door. Friendly, familiar. He opened it to find Mara from the West Station. Gray hair tied back, rifle slung over her shoulder.
You okay?
She asked.
Yeah, Elias said. Thanks. She glanced inside, spotting Sira. Her expression softened. So that's what this was about?
Yeah, Mara nodded once. You did right. Then she turned and waved to the others.
Vehicles began to disperse, people heading back to their lives as quickly as they had come. No speeches, no drama, just neighbors. Elias closed the door and looked back at Sira. She was staring at him like she was seeing something impossible.
They fight, she said slowly.
Not their own. Elias shrugged a little, uncomfortable with the weight in her gaze. That's just how we do things. She looked toward the sky where the ship had vanished, then back at the small house, the table, the blanket still draped over the bench. Something inside her had shifted. Not all the fear was gone. Scars that deep did not fade in a day. But for the first time, she had seen a different kind of power. Not the power to capture, the power to protect.